So welcome to BookFilter. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me. Your new book is Uprooted.
Yes.
And it's based on and it draws upon fairy tales and folklore, especially from your parents' roots in Russia and Poland. But most of all, it draws upon laziness or playing hooky. You know, I'm not sure.
Yes. Oh no, you're going to make me confess.
That's right. Right. You're supposed to be working on book 8, which you have finished now.
Yes.
Of the
Yes, I
Temeraire
got
series.
it done. I got it done.
And this one called to you. It wouldn't let you go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I really just the other day kind of rediscovered one of the pieces of how Uprooted happened. There are all sorts of elements that go into a book, you know, and then there's sort of that one impetus that makes you actually write something down on the blank page. And yeah, for that I was procrastinating. I was supposed to be working on Blood of Tyrants, which was the 8th book of the Temeraire series. And the Temeraire series is very realist. It's grounded in the Napoleonic Wars. The dragons are inherently fantastical creatures. So they have a kind of magic and wonder that they bring with them automatically. But there's no magic in the Temeraire universe.
Right.
They're
creatures
biological creatures, exactly.
Yeah.
And granted, you have to sort of ignore the ecology a little bit, but they're still, I try to make them feel real, and I try to make the world feel not just real in the sort of emotional sense, which every book you want to feel real that way, but in a kind of engineering sense almost. You want to sort of believe that it all works. But at the same time, a lot of my own love of fantasy comes from magical universes where something can happen that has that sort of tinge of wonder, I guess, to it. And that was part of what made me write down the first line, which was, "Our dragon doesn't eat the girls he takes." And as soon as I wrote
But that's
down
not the full line.
That
Isn't it? Even despite what people say.
Yes, that piece was the part that I wrote down first.
Oh, okay.
And in that line, I immediately sort of understood that this was a world with magic in it. The dragon was not a dragon; he was a human wizard, and the narrator's voice really quite came to me, almost just with that line. And I don't generally write in first person. I've done it a few times, but it's not sort of my instinctive mode. But this was very much a first-person narrator, you know, Agnieszka's voice. I didn't actually know her name until later on in the book, but it really all kind of happened because I wanted to write about a totally different kind of dragon, and wrote down that line, and suddenly this whole sort of universe really quite vividly popped into my head.
Well, I mean, the Temeraire series you originally envisioned as 6 books. It expanded to 9.
Yes.
It's been a decade of your life.
Yes.
It's very exciting and fulfilling. But you've got other ideas that are sort of circling LAX, like planes stacked up.
Yes, they really are. That's exactly how I feel, that they're all just waiting to... I feel like they're actually in a line on the ground. And they're all like, let us go. We want to leave.
But so this one, why was this the one that you got that line, but you've had other things that you've worked on?
Yes.
And you said how if you write like 10,000 words, you write a certain amount and you know, okay, I've really got something here and I can't let it go.
Right.
So that's what happened here. You just sort of kept going.
You know, I basically wrote that down. I wrote the first, I think about 10,000 words. And around then, I sort of, you know, I'm a discovery kind of writer. There are writers who plan first and then write. There are writers who sort of discover things along the way and then kind of figure out a plan. I'm definitely in the second camp, where I need to sort of discover a world. If I sit down and start thinking about it a little too soon in a kind of analytical way, I can kind of lose my thread. Because I generally find, in fact, in those first 10,000 words, there will be things that don't necessarily reconcile, that are sort of contradictory, that don't actually make a sort of real sense, they don't quite fit together. The pieces are not sort of smoothly interlocking, but you have to kind of get it all down. And then after you've got enough of a mass that it can kind of stand up on its own, you know, then it's like, what is that game, Jenga?
Yeah,
We haven't started playing that with my daughter yet, but
right now she just knock them over.
Right, exactly. You know, sort of when it's the structure is robust enough that you can pull a few blocks out and then patch it all up. That's when I can start sort of making my plan.
But this book feels very realistic too. I mean, it's a world with magic, but there are rules to it, and the magic isn't just, oh, you wave a wand and things happen. it's like a formula, text, you work at it, you become
Yeah.
skilled at it. Some of it takes a long time, some of it's very expensive, other kinds are easy. So
Yeah.
it did feel like a very real world, not like you were just the rules were out the
Right.
window.
I mean, there are some writers. I think Patricia McKillop does this sometimes in a really beautiful way, where it's more a lyrical experience of magic. It's not a concrete experience of magic, where magic. It's not that it doesn't have any rules, but those rules don't necessarily feel kind of tangible. And Uprooted is a different kind of magic. I mean, I feel like you can do either kind well,
Sure.
right? But I do think that what I was trying to do in Uprooted was make this feel like a kind of homely word, not, a kind of a practical world. That's right. That's probably the right word.
One big character, well, not a big character, but one through line is Baba Yaga, which appears in Polish and Russian folktales.
Yes.
But she's usually evil. She's usually a horrible, terrible witch.
Yes,
But
Baba
in this-
Yaga is Baba Yaga is like an elemental force.
Right.
And here she is, she's not necessarily a good force.
She's a dangerous. She's strong.
Yes.
Yeah.
She is that kind of elemental power. And I was thinking at one point of having her be a stronger presence in the book. But I realized that it felt wrong. It was like a less is more kind of thing, where, we get hints of Baba Yaga and her existence in this world, and it connects, and Agnieszka is sort of part of that tradition, part of a tradition of magic in line with her. But at the same time, Baba Yaga herself is kind of just almost a feature of the landscape. Like, she's there. She's there somewhere in the background, even though she's not a mover.
When you have a little girl who thinks, she's like, she speaks, and she says, are you Baba Yaga? But she's not scared when she says it. Like you might be if all you read was the old folktales and you thought that somebody you should run screaming from as quickly as possible.
It's funny, that little girl at the very end of the book is actually. She's actually a character. She's an homage to one of my favorite Polish fairy tales, which is called Agnieszka z Krawek Nieba, which is where the name sort of came from. Agnieszka is obviously a very common Polish name,
Sure.
but that was the specific inspiration.
And in English?
Agnieszka, Piece of the Sky.
Yeah, I tried to find that, and I couldn't find that story.
It's not available in translation at all, and in fact, I have a translation that I'm trying to work on, and it's just been held up. Yes, I know I've been communicating with the author's grandson, and so we're trying to get like an English translation published of this story, because I really love it. I did a translation with my mother's help for my daughter, because this was one of those, all of these Polish stories, like this whole book of her fairy tales and another book of Polish fairy tales, were like the two main sort of texts of my childhood. And I really would love to share them with an American audience also, because I feel like, we have so many English fairy tales. There's lots of translations of German fairy tales. We don't
Some Italian,
yeah, exactly, right. But we don't have as many sort of Polish fairy tales, I think.
Yeah, the few I found are sort of rough sort of descriptions almost of the stories rather than tales that being told.
Yeah.
So this is a story that your mom told you when you were a child. Did she tell it to you? I mean, your parents came from overseas. You were born in Brooklyn,
Yes.
right?
In Staten Island.
Staten Island. Well, there you go.
Yes.
But they were immigrants. Where did they come from?
They came. My mother was living in Warsaw before she came here, and my father. They knew each other in Poland, but my father's Jewish, and his whole family was basically. They started out. They were basically trying to get out of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And they had survived the Holocaust, they'd survived World War II, both of them, and his whole family. Yes, exactly. They were all kind of moving here. Like his older sister and her husband were already in this country, and so they kind of broke up, and he left and came here. And then my mother actually came over here as a visiting professor of mathematics in Florida, and they met again here, and she decided to stay.
If she was in Florida, how did she?
He went. I think he went to. My dad went to Florida to see her. You know, it was deliberate. Like the reunion was deliberate. They wanted to see each other again, and then she decided to stay.
I grew up in Pompano, Fort Lauderdale. Where was she?
Oh wow. She was.
And I went to college in Gainesville.
I'm trying to remember which university it was. I'm completely blanking. It might have been Gainesville. Is there a University of Florida?
Yeah, there's Florida, University of Florida, Florida State, and Tallahassee.
It was the University of Florida. I don't know which branch, but
well, that's probably the only one at the time. Now there's University of South Florida, Miami, and all that. But it might have been in Gainesville, which is a muggy, miserable place.
Yes, she remembered the mugginess quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So your mom was a mathematician, taught math.
Yes. My dad's an electrical engineer, so in this country they both actually went into computers.
So did you have a clash with them? You were all like games and fantasy and tales and.
Oh no! I mean, my mother basically read me all these Polish fairy tales. She read me stories. We had these wonderful books that were. English and Polish in the same book. That were like comic books. And there was one about, there were sort of not historical, sort of like half historical legends. One about the founding of of Krakow and how King Krak defeated the Wawel dragon. So that was a very early story for me. And she read me these Polish fairy tales.
Did you read them in Polish or English?
In Polish, yeah. Cool. No, I spoke Polish fluently until I was about 5. And then I lost it. Sadly, my little sister was born and I went to kindergarten, and it was sort of the death knell for speaking Polish at home. But it's actually interesting, when I read those fairy tales now, and I work on a translation, words don't mean the right thing. Like I find words and I have an intuitive, instinctive sense of what they mean to me, which is something clearly from when I was 5 years old. And then I put them into like Google Translate or look them up in a dictionary, and they don't mean the right, and the answer, and it's wrong. The answer is wrong. I'm like, no, that's not correct. That's not what it means. And of course, it is what it means. And what's hilarious is, in fact, so I have a different understanding of these stories than a native reader of Polish does, because my brain is translating them in ways that don't, because I had a relatively limited exposure to the Polish language, my brain kind of came up with its own meanings for certain words.
So what is the story of Agnieszka?
Agnieszka, it's this little girl Agnieszka who lives with her grandmother and a yellow cow, and there's a dark wood nearby them, and people who go into that wood are never seen again, and her father went into that wood, and she meets a fairy who teaches her, like, I'm trying to squeeze this story in, a fairy who basically teaches her a magic phrase that people on the other side of the forest are just like us. And it's essentially, it's this really nice parable about not fearing the other. To me, it's very much a story about, but the wonderful thing for me as a child was that the protagonist was a child. Like and I don't mean like 17 years old, I mean like a 10-year-old, 8, yeah, exactly, a small child, who nevertheless was able to do like this awesome magical thing. And so, and I wanted, and in fact, when I named my Agnieszka, it was this feeling of, that wanting that feeling of a character who seems unlikely, an unlikely hero, and yet nevertheless does something amazing, and has unexpected power.
Even though she's a klutz.
Yeah, yeah.
She's messy. She keeps dropping things.
Yes.
So your parents were here and they got together and they got into the computer world.
Yes.
Well, that was a good time to do it in the early 70s.
Yeah.
But if they were in New York, or where were they? Yeah. So how did they?
They were here.
I didn't know there was much computering going on.
Oh no. Well, they were working for banks mostly. They were.
I see.
They were. My mom was working at the Federal Reserve, and my dad actually ended up working for Grumman Aerospace. So there was definitely a lot of computers happening already. In fact, I remember when I was maybe 10 or so, this is hilarious now, of course, my mother would bring home a terminal to work from home with, if you've ever seen war games, yes. that cupped modem where you would take the actual old-fashioned telephone handset and you plugged it in, right? And she would bring one of those home and connect to the system to work.
Super
and
exciting.
She would let me play on the Federal Reserve systems. And they had like the adventure game, the text adventure game.
You are in a cave.
Yes, you are in a maze of twisty passages, all alike. Yes.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
So you were typing in.
Yeah.
Pick up sword or.
Exactly. Yep.
Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is
crashing. It's like but yeah.
So you grew up with obviously math and engineering and all that world. Were you good at math and engineering? Did you like science?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love science, and I actually was my graduate work was in computer science. I have a master's in computer science and was working on my dissertation when I actually left to work on a computer game.
Right.
And it's one of those funny things for me. Writing and coding are two sides of a kind of similar coin. Where what I was doing while I was working on my computer science degree, I was writing fan fiction as my hobby. That was what I was doing for fun. And now that I'm writing professionally, I do a lot of coding in my spare time for fun. Because for me, and actually that's sort of a parallel to the two kinds of magic. Mm-hmm. In Uprooted, where there's the one that's sort of the artistic way of approaching it and one that's the sort of engineering, analytical way of approaching it, but they're both about creating something, making something that works. And I feel very strongly about that for me the act of writing is about creating something that works, that does something, that has a function. When it's a way of interacting with another person, right? That you pick up the book and you read it and things happen to you, and I put ideas and images into your head and take you on a story with me, and create an experience. And for me, programming's similar. I'm trying to build something that you interact with that does something.
You were married. So how did you meet your husband? He was already a novelist?
No. Well, Charles hired me.
Well, there heavens. This is
right,
all different.
Straight out of college. In fact, he hired me for a job in Boston. He was here in New York, and I went to work in Boston. But I was working on a project called Juno, which he founded as part of, which is a free internet email service.
Ah.
And I came on because I'd done a lot of programming at that point just for fun. I had both like the communication skills and the technical skills, and I ended up running the support for our beta test over there. And then at that point, but I sort of worked there in the Boston office for a year. Sorry, this is so like autobiographical, but it's I worked there for a year and discovered that I wanted to go back to school for computer science, and I basically asked, can I come back and work part-time in New York, and go back to school, and they let me do that because there was a great company to work for, and
had a good boss.
Yeah, well, and then who was it? Charles's assistant at the time organized an informal like scuba diving trip. There were a bunch of scuba divers in the office, and they were like, we should all go together, because this was in fact, when you're straight out of college, I was working like 60, 80-hour weeks, everybody was in the office all the time. It was that startup culture. But so it was, so a bunch of us are all going to the Bahamas. Anybody who wants to can join in, can come in and come. And I was like, well, I can't scuba dive, but I like the idea of going to the Bahamas and sitting on the beach and read. And in fact, that was literally the exact same thought that went through Charles's head. So we both ended up on the beach, and he was reading Cornell Woolrich, and I was reading John Donne, and yeah,
the rest is
history. And yeah, so he actually, as you probably know, went on to found Hard Case Crime,
right?
Which is pulp novels, and he introduced me to my agent, who was his first boss when he was, I think, 17. He went to work for Asimov's.
Oh wow!
And the editor at the time was Cynthia Manson, who is now a literary agent, and represents me. So
did he introduce you as friends, or were you?
Yes, no, we were friends.
Yeah.
She was at our wedding, And
So then you
it was
sheepishly
literally,
said-
you know, that was 1999. We got married in 2004. I had a manuscript and I had 55,000 words of it, literally, and I sent it to her
How
and
many
I
pages
said,
is that?
55,000.
words.
Well, the books, the Temeraire books are all roughly 100 to 120,000.
So it's about half of the book.
Yeah, it's about half the book. And so I sent it to her and was like, you know, do you think this is saleable? And she herself did not represent science fiction and fantasy, oddly, because she'd kind of been an editor in that field. She kind of made a deliberate decision. She didn't want to say no to her friends, right? So she deliberately sort of eschewed science fiction and fantasy for a while. But, you know, we were two good friends. She couldn't say no to it. So she actually, she took it to her friend Betsy Mitchell, who was the editor-in-chief at Del Rey. And Betsy basically said, can I, you know, and it took a while, because, you know, but it took like a few months. I was still writing the book.
That's not a while, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, people, whenever I'm at a convention, someone's like, so how did you break into the industry? And I'm like, yeah, you don't want to hear my story, because it's just, you know, everything.
It's useless for you.
Yeah, stars align. It's basically like, well, find a guy whose first boss knows the editor of Del Rey, and marry him. And that, you know, it's like step one.
Yeah.
Step two, profit, right? But basically, so she took it to Betsy, and Betsy said, I love it. Where's the rest? And can I have 2 more? And they had this plan basically to bring out 3 books together. They wanted to try this one after another, one each month. And they thought that Temeraire would be a good book to do it with, and if I could write 2, and I said, yeah, you know, by the time I finished the first book, I knew I had more stories in me. I knew I was like, yes, I have a trilogy in me. And then as I wrote it, I realized I was really enjoying going around the world.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this idea suddenly, like, I'll go to each continent. So I said, well, let's make it 7 books. And then as I went on, I realized that the story, the arc of the story took form, and it didn't actually first it didn't quite work to go to all the continents. It would have had to be sort of like jury-rigged in a way that, you know, like we were talking about Ultron, that you can't force things.
Yeah.
If you force things, you get a bad book.
Why am I in Antarctica? You know, yeah.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's a good question. That's a question that many a dragon would ask himself.
The heck am I
Why
doing?
am I in Antarctica? I can't wear a fur coat. It's cold. Why am I here? So yes, that was an example of, and my story kind of needed the longer arc. And I needed to write the 9 books, and it's and in fact you can sort of see the seams a little bit, like book 6, Tons of Serpents. It feels to me like a flawed book. Like it was the book that I could write at the time, and I'm actually one of those big believers in, like, you don't sort of compare yourself. You write the best book you can at the moment, but you know it shows the seams of, like, I literally kind of just figured out how the whole series was going to end. And it, you know, and it's sort of like, it's trying to steer a big ship. At that time, it's, you know, it's like trying to steer a dragon transport, basically. You've got this enormous thing, and it doesn't turn kind of easy. And so that was, but then I sort of feel like it came back on track.
Well, what was fascinating about the first 3 books is sort of a precursor to what's been happening in self-publishing and online publishing and ebook publishing, I should say, where authors find that their success comes from having 3 books or 6 books, or splitting up a book into 4 parts and having it come out almost like a serial. And so you had the Temeraire books, which came out one after you didn't have to wait a year,
right?
You know, or God forbid 2. It was like boom, 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 and it sort of like binge reading, binge watching television. And the authors who are doing that have been doing that a lot in ebooks, where they say, get the series set and then launch it.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I mean, it makes sense because, you know, as a reader, and frankly, this is actually part of why I've sort of gone a little bit in the other direction with Uprooted and with the work that I'm doing now. where I'm trying to write self-enclosed stories, like a standalone story. Because I do think that there's a real value to having something that's complete. You know, a story that lands. When you end a story, when you land it the right way, you change everything that came before it. You change the whole experience that the reader has had of the work as a whole. And you can't do that if you're sort of making it up as you go along. And I think, you know, that's part of why, for instance, comic books frequently have these sort of like jury-rigged plots. Or powers appear out of nowhere, or like, you know, and suddenly an asteroid struck them. Because you have to, that's what you have to resort to in a certain way. If you don't have the luxury of seeing your whole piece and fixing the whole, and making it all work together as a whole before you put it out.
Well, some stories are meant to be serious, and some are meant to be just one, you know, just a tale to tell. I mean, the Uprooted feels like a complete done. I mean, it's not that you couldn't return to the world, but it's clearly like, I mean, and you stuck the landing with the ending. It's
Thank
just,
you.
yeah,
Thank you.
You really do. And there's not a lot of fantasy where what matters is the characters in the sense of them and their growth and their relationship and their life, as opposed to defeating the villain and, you know, destroying the sword of death, you know, whatever it might be. Right. And it really felt like that. It was a very warm ending.
Good.
Yeah, very nice. So these books came out, the 3 books in a row, boom, 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 and that was and it worked obviously very well. But even before they came out, they were out in galleys, and people like Scott Rudin and producers and all these people in Hollywood and pay attention, and they hear about hot properties, whatever. And your books got optioned even before the first one was published.
Yes.
By the one person in the world you would like to have option your books.
Yeah, you know, and I can't really talk about it at all right now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, because it's I'm sure at some point you've learned, as I'm sure you knew, there's nothing more expensive one can do in Hollywood than like be on the water and fantasy. And so you're like on the water in fantasy in a period.
Yes,
it's like
exactly.
You've literally made the worst possible, most expensive thing. It'll be a lovely $400 million film. Thank you very much. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a decade.
No. Well, it's interesting. You know, I very much hope Temeraire will make it to the screen at some point in some form.
Some screen.
Yes.
Who knows what kind of?
You know, who knows? And we just have to see. You know, the wonderful thing is technology is becoming better. Technology is improving, and the things that are possible now were not possible 10 years ago, and were unimaginable 10 years before that. You know, so I'm really excited to see. I hope it makes it there. I'm not. You know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, but as a little kid, did you write stories and?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know. I actually
I
started by forcing my mother to make up stories for me, because you see, I was not happy that Captain Hook died at the end of Peter Pan. That was unacceptable. So he had to escape from the crocodile, and he and the pirates had to end up on a desert island where they had various survivalist adventures, and they had to like climb palm trees and get coconuts, and then they had to become friends with Peter and be reformed, and so I started.
Little did you know you could have made a lot of money on that.
Fiction at an early age, and I think I wrote when I was in 5th grade. I was about 10 or 11. I wrote 150 pages longhand.
Wow. Of
a fantasy novel.
Nice.
I have no idea what happened to it.
Oh.
I don't remember a single thing about it. I'm reasonably certain that a great work has not been lost to mankind. But yeah, I did that, and I don't know. I have no idea where it is.
So, but in your book there is intimacy, and there is romance, and there is sex.
Yes.
And there's a neat thing with characters who do magic together, and because blending of the magic of 2 people in the book, it's a very intimate process, and you're not even sure as a reader whether this intimacy that they have is just because they're doing magic together, or whether they actually are attracted to each other, whether that's just confusing them because they're doing it. So it's a very nice way of sort of teasing out what might be happening with the characters and what's going on there. But you've got sex because, you know, that's part of life.
It is, and you know, because it was right for the characters at that particular moment. And you know, if I'm going to write a sex scene, I want it to be a good sex scene, right? The same way if I write a battle scene, I want you to really be feeling like, you know, feeling the cannonball slamming into the walls and splinters flying in your face. And the same way that if I'm writing a scene where something really painful is happening, I want you to feel that sorrow, to feel in sympathy with the characters, because that's, to me, especially in a first-person narrative, the virtue of first person is that it really does let you feel. It's a very intimate perspective on the internal life of another person. And if you're not feeling strongly and deeply, then I'm doing something wrong. And that's sort of the key to me.
Yeah, and this book really flips a lot, because you don't necessarily expect, in fantasy, there's not a lot of sex. There's not a lot of, there might be romance, but it would only be heightened and holy and beautiful and pure, and sort of, you expect them in the moonlight perhaps to hold a hand chastely, and so you don't.
And I mean, it's literally one scene.
No, right? No, it's not a book. It's not a book.
Scene.
Yeah, it's not.
But it's just. But at the same time, it's that was the way the scene belonged, and at one point, an edit was suggested to me. That would have involved taking out a portion of that scene. And it was specifically the portion where Agnieszka actually is having an orgasm, right? And and I think that's revelatory of the general sort of instinctive, like but no, that's in that box. They're not allowed to take it out of the box and put it in a book, even though it's not like that particular moment was not more explicit than any of the other moments.
No.
And at the same time, I don't. Nobody should, in a way, feel bad if they don't want to read a sex scene, right?
But this is not, to be clear, this is not a wildly explicit. Even this one scene. This is a classic tale rooted in folklore and in a real world with magic in it, and there's adventure and excitement and all that stuff. But it's part of flipping what our expectations are. There's a Kasia. I knew what was going to happen to Kasia, and it didn't happen. I was sure I knew what would happen to her, and it didn't happen. There's other people where you have in Temeraire, you have women who do achieve success in a man's world doing what men do, and perhaps better, of course, they have to, just to be treated as an equal. But in this world, we have women who do that, but we also have women who succeed in their own terms.
Yeah.
And we have, in this book, when I look back on it, I really feel like there are no villains.
No, and that was very deliberate to me. I mean, they're even...
But that just doesn't happen. I mean, you have bad guys and you have evil, and there's a lot of danger in this book, and people do terrible things.
I mean, there are bad people in this book.
Well,
right? There are people in this book who are bad, but like all bad people, that does not necessarily... there is no person who is wholly bad in every moment of their interaction with all other human beings.
Well, they're scary because they're convinced what they're doing is right and for the best.
Yeah.
That's what makes them so scary.
And unable to sort of see out of their own perspective as well. And that's, I think that's very true. I think that's how we do evil acts, right? That's how most evil gets done. It's not done by people who are like,
twirling the mustache.
Now I'm going to like, starve all the poor orphans and launch them into a boat. No, most people don't.
So when you were growing up and throughout your career, I mean, you're a kid in grade school and high school, going to comic book stores. You're going to.
I wish I got to go to comic book stores.
No?
There was no. I grew up on Long Island. Actually, we lived. We moved from the city when I was 5 or so, and you could not get anywhere without a car. And the closest thing was like a bike ride away, and it was a stationery store that had one turning rack
with like, Archie comics on it.
Archie comics and like a few completely random, completely unpredictable. I literally, and it's also, my parents came from a totally different culture. They didn't comic books. They literally did not know that comic books existed. I literally did not understand that comic books came out on a monthly schedule for years. I got a handful of them as Halloween. People gave them away trick-or-treating. So I had 5 comics basically for a long time until I got to college. I didn't get to really read comics.
Well, I was picturing you as the girl reading sci-fi.
I was the kid in the library. Back corner of the library, reading Tamora Pierce at lunchtime instead of going out to play.
The final book in the Temeraire series, does it have a pub date? Is that still February of 2016? Or?
Yes, the final book is League of Dragons, and that one I'm still writing it.
Ah, so it's not. It might get pushed.
It might get pushed. I'm literally in like the last chapter, and the ending is basically written, and it's really just sort of there's one quite complex battle scene. The battles in the Temeraire series are quite hard to kind of make work in that way because the scale, and in this case, you know, I've totally cheated in previous books by piggybacking largely on on real Napoleonic battles, and sort of changing certain elements as needed, and thinking about how would this work if I added dragons to this. But in this book, the final battle, the history has sufficiently changed that it's quite hard that it's not going to reproduce the conditions of any one battle.
So you really
so I'm literally, I'm creating this like strange Frankensteinian battle out of like pieces of 5 different, you know, battles from the spring campaign of 1813, and it's hard. And so I've literally had to pause it while I do promotion work for Uprooted, and then hopefully it'll finish quickly, and hopefully it'll still come out in February. But if not, it'll be sometime next year.
And then when that happens, you'll actually finally be able to actually look at some of the Temeraire fan fiction if you're so inclined, because you know you don't want to get it into your head when you're working on the books. But now it's all been
it's different. You know, I know some writers I don't worry about that so much. I probably would just as soon not do it, just because, you know, it's sort of why kind of put something else into my head at the same time. But actually, it's more that I can't enjoy Temeraire fan fiction the way I enjoy fan fiction of, say, you know, Captain America or Tolkien. Because I'm like, you got it wrong. You know, I'm like, I haven't written that in any of the books, but I know it, right? It's not actually in canon, but I happen to know that character's got a sister, and you know it's wrong. And you can't do that, right? You can't actually enjoy fan fiction if you are evaluating it in this sort of separate way. And I mean, I'm actually very hopeful that once I finish the series and it's done, and Temeraire is kind of done in my head, that I will be able to take a step back and then actually enjoy the universe as a reader, because I usually can do that even with my own work. Like after a while of the book sitting on the side, it stops being mine. It's just another book that I can pick up and read.
And you've got the end of the Temeraire series in sight, and you've got this new book coming out, which is getting great reviews. And you've got like tons of books chomping at the bit, ready to come out of it.
Yes. In fact, I've got like 4 or 5 of them that are all sort of like me.
So how do you do the Sophie's Choice? How do you decide which child to?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's more. Of course, I can always go back to the others, but there's one that's currently sort of taking the lead. That's inspired loosely by The Secret Garden.
Are your folks still alive?
Yes, they are.
So your mom, being able to share your mom with this book with Agnieszka, based on the tales that she told you as a child, must have been really exciting.
Yes.
Well, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much. This was great.